Hi, I'm Barb.
Hi, I'm Pat.
Pat and I have a lot of interesting conversations.
Yes, and we thought you might like to listen in to our podcast that we've called Coffee House Inspirations.
We hope you will enjoy our topics.
Good morning, Barb.
Good morning, Pat.
So we just wanted to say welcome back after we took a week off.
Yes.
From our busy schedules.
Yes, we've got, very, very busy. I know I'm terribly busy.
Well, I could barely squeeze this one in this morning. That's how busy I am.
Yeah, I'm not busy at all.
Yes, and we're very fortunately enjoying a beautiful rain this morning, which is just lovely.
Yeah. Because we're going to need it, because next week we're going to be sitting in front of our fans and staying there.
Yes, I know we're going into the 30s, which is hard to imagine, but
yeah, 36 and 37. I can't remember it kind of being. I know last year we had a couple of hot days around, not quite that hot. So it's really going to be. I might have to camp out downstairs.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what I was saying. I've got an old camping blow-up mattress downstairs that I might just haul out. And if I get to bed, I'll take my blankie downstairs and go and sleep there.
Everything's always better with a blankie.
I know. Anyway, so we decided that we're going to, for this particular podcast, we're going to talk about power. And does power corrupt? Or do people corrupt the position of power? You know, it's kind of a double thing there. So and how we sort of came to this idea, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we've been looking at a social issue around, you know, the history of residential schools and some things that have come to light in terms of, you know, what the residential schools were intended to achieve and how badly it worked out for a lot of Indigenous people, and probably most. And we were trying to kind of piece together what happened there. You know, what is the part that systemic racism plays in something like that? What is the part that is just, you know, too much power in the church, and possibly in the government as well? And I think people would really look at that seriously too, because, you know, the intention in the beginning of that transition was to assimilate Indigenous into the, you know, white culture, Canadian white culture. And things have been going progressively more off the rails as more is found out about the you know, the way people have been treated and how many people are dying, and had died rather. And there's a new piece of information that isn't altogether clear just yet, but they're looking at the potential of another 700 graves. I know. Yeah, we were just I was just talking about that this morning with someone, and I read yesterday that they think it could be the largest site yet, and maybe down for the future too. Might be the largest site that they have found and will find. So we were then talking about, you know, let's take a look at the whole idea of, you know, of power in a system or in a society, and how does it go from sort of leadership, general leadership? How does it go from leadership to abuse? And you were telling me yesterday, I think, about a quote that you found from, who was it? Was it Abraham Lincoln? Yes, yeah. Which I thought was really excellent. Yeah, Abraham Lincoln said, nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power. So I thought that was, yes. A couple of reasons I thought that was really brilliant, because in all of the research that I've been doing, the functioning, the high functioning aspect of leadership, which is power, is all comes down to basically to character.
That's what I found too. That's exactly what I finalized. Like after I looked at everything, that's exactly the conclusion that I came to as well.
And that the abuse of power is often related to not only individual dysfunction, but organizational dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that
Yes.
if you have that sort of inherent racism in the organization, it suits a lot of dysfunctional people.
Right. Yes. Well, that's what. Yeah. So I was actually pleasantly surprised at that conclusion because, unfortunately, I kind of had the idea that people, even good people, got corrupted by power, and that they couldn't sustain if they went in there, if they started off with really good intentions and good moral, background, stamina, whatever, that they would get ultimately corrupted by power. But I found that wasn't the case, and I was pleasantly surprised about that.
And I think that it could happen, that there are circumstances where that could happen. But I was following an interesting trail when I was looking at this, because I was looking at two things, trying to kind of understand, from a developmental point of view, what really happens. And two things kept coming up. And one was the concept of bullying, early, youth, young people learning bullying tactics and that sort of thing. And the concept of narcissism.
Okay.
And how that tends to satisfy people who have narcissistic tendencies. And I wanted to just first read a definition so that you understand. So there's a manual called the DSM-5, which is a diagnostic and statistics manual that is put out by the American Psychiatric Association. And it has, it lists all the psychological psychiatric disorders in the manual. And so I was looking at the definition of narcissism in that. And the definition is very straightforward and quite short, which is nice. It's a grandiose sense of self-importance, a preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love, a belief that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood by or should associate with other special or high status people or institutions.
Oh, wow.
And then I went over to the good old Mayo Clinic because I wanted to see, well, what do these symptoms look like? And I'll just read a few, but have an exaggerated sense of self-importance, have a sense of entitlement and require constant excessive admiration.
Wow.
Expect to be recognized as superior even without achievements that warrant it. Exaggerate achievements and talents. Oh, I did that better than anybody. Be preoccupied with fantasies about success, power, brilliance, beauty, or the perfect mate. Monopolize conversations and belittle or look down on people they perceive as inferior. Take advantage of others to get what they want. Behave in an arrogant or haughty manner, coming across as conceited, boastful, and pretentious. That's just a few of them.
Well, that's so fun. As you're reading all of that, everything that you just read, I just see one particular name that they should have beside it in all of those explanations, and I won't say who.
Does the first name start with D?
Yes.
And does the last name start with T?
Yes.
Oh, good old Doug Turner. Yep, we know him.
Wow, that just fits that person to a T.
So then I looked at what some of the research that was being done in the schools around bullying. And they were this is a psychological study looking at behavioral trends. And there's a premise here that narcissism is on the rise.
Oh,
And they went to this number that just blew me off the chair here. Approximately 70% of students today score higher on narcissist scales than 30 years ago.
so why do you think that, like, where does narcissism come from?
Well, I don't know. It says the research has found that narcissism inversely correlates to empathy. And the higher the score on the scale of narcissism, the lower the empathy exhibited. And I think that therein lies a huge key, don't you?
Yes. Oh, wow.
Because, empathy is, we assume that everybody has some.
Yeah. We
But
hope.
we hope. But, we know a lot of people, from our work career and from our family life and from being in the society that we live in, that there are people that have a lot of empathy for others. They can relate to the distress that people have. They can, work to help people to, improve situations and such. And then, we all know people who'll go, well, that's their own fault and let them swim in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because,
No empathy.
because I'm not like that, that kind of narcissistic sort of, distancing from people that are deemed to be, troubled or something of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes on to say lack of empathy is considered one of the most telling narcissistic traits and one of the most striking features of people with narcissistic personality disorder. There's also a lot of research on in the corporate world and how power and people's rising to power is often related to a personality who requires the position.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I found out as well. And I've got this article that I was reading. It says 7 powers leaders can use for good or evil, and it's legitimate power, coercive power, expert power, informational power, power of reward, connection power, and referent power. And so then there's a little blurb under each one. But I found that was pretty interesting. That's oh, that looks like it's American Express. I was just looking to see where that article came from.
Well, and that quite possibly because a lot of corporations are trying to deal with misuse of power.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's so detrimental to their overall success in with their users.
Yeah. Especially, I think especially these days, right? People are being held more accountable, in this kind of cancel culture.
Yep. And this, and there's a lot of research beginning to emerge around the Me Too movement. Mm-hmm. And how, the abuse of power in corporations that is so much directed at women.
Right.
That men don't want, they just don't want sharing power with women. And they have all sorts of ways that are sort of, some are very overt and some of them are very covert. And there was an article that was looking at the litigious aspect of it, and that large corporations are often able to hire expensive lawyers if someone challenges their power. Mm-hmm. And they can exhaust the victim's ability to afford legal support very quickly, and they know it. The power abusers are often in a position to control the legal outcomes.
Yeah, right. And and money is power.
Yes, and that it speaks to the same, to the same sort of kind of character. So there is a lot of, I think, recognition of power abuse in corporate world, and I often think of that in terms of the organizations that have been directly related to the suffering of the Indigenous people around the residential schools, and what the heck is that all about? we looked at the structure of the church a bit and saw that they, really do have their own so-called moral codes and protect them with their own legal in-house kind of structure.
Mhm.
What happens at that level when you have, just use an example of a residential school, and what do we know about that from the inside? Nothing. But when you can speculate on how does it get to be that people are willing to enforce rules, so-called, or protocol, or whatever they wanted to call it, that cause such pain and suffering and obvious death.
Mm-hmm. And so many abusers, like I can't believe that they all had those tendencies. I mean, that's an awful lot of people. There must have been, and I would say that there were a lot of probably nuns and priests and teachers, whatever, that actually did show empathy towards the children, because that's who the core of them was. And thank God. I mean, I don't know like particulars or anything, but I would assume that there were at least some.
Well, I would assume there would be some too, and it becomes quite apparent that there weren't a lot in leadership.
No, but don't you think so? So I think you and I have both found that positions of power attract
Yes.
people, like you were just talking about, like narcissists,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. They actually attract those people to those positions.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, yeah. And it's a perfect fit, isn't it?
Yes.
Because if you look at some of the characteristics, of the narcissistic personality disorder, and that's all on a scale, that's a continuum of some kind. But listen to some of the stuff that happens when a narcissist is having trouble handling a situation, or has a perception of criticism.
Okay.
They can become impatient or angry when they don't receive special treatment, have significant interpersonal problems, and easily feel slighted.
Mm-hmm.
So you can imagine, if you're looking that as an example, if you've got, Sister Anne in charge of 12 children who are not listening to her, and she believes that she has this, God-given right to treat these children in a way that she deems appropriate, and they rebel.
Mm-hmm.
You could see where people, you have that kind of power where they just start abusing or punishing physically. Yeah. React with rage or contempt and try to belittle the other person to make themselves appear superior. Have difficulty regulating emotions and behavior. Experience major problems dealing with stress and adapting to change. And feel depressed and moody because they fall short of perfection.
Yeah. So can you imagine a person like that taking out all of those frustrations on these poor, children that are under their charge?
Yeah.
That they have complete power over.
Yeah. And it seems to me that if that sort of, approach kind of goes up the ladder, the hierarchy of whatever organization it is, whether it's the church or a corporation or a school system or a police force or whatever, that if you have a few of those folks in powerful positions, there is the ground for all of that abuse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it kind of trickles down.
Yeah. So I think that whole concept of, character is so important, because, it's not always straightforward, easy, I don't think, to identify. For example, if you have a very aggressive person in your organization that wants to achieve the highest position possible, it's not the easiest thing to identify if they actually have a personality disorder or whether they're just very driven, because you know, that what they also say is that the narcissist can also be a very charming, charismatic person.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they look like good leadership stuff.
Yeah. It would really be hard. It would really be hard to, you know, if you're doing like interviews and stuff like that, it would be very difficult to figure out a person's true, you know, kind of
Yeah.
moral character.
Yes. Yes. And I think that it seems to me that a lot of the training that's going on in organizations now are to really try and identify some of those, you know, those characteristics
Yeah.
to use that as, you know, as sort of a model to see how people would handle power. Because, you know, there's some couple of really interesting bits of research that I can kind of remember hearing about in the, you know, in the 80s and like in the late 80s, 90s, where they were looking at what would people do with power. And one of them in particular was an experiment that they did where they had two groups of people. One group was in a room with some electrical kind of machinery or something of that nature, and the other people were hooked up to that stuff in the next room. And the people in the room that was hooked up couldn't see the people in the room that was operating and giving these little shocks to people.
Okay. Yeah.
And over a period of time, they realized that the people that were handling the machines and distributing the little electrical shocks were going higher and higher and higher. And they literally had to stop because they now had to figure out what the heck was going on here, because they were actually looking at that concept of what happens if you have power over someone, and when do you intervene using your empathic skills and abilities to know that you're actually doing harm. And
yes.
they've done a couple of research projects like something similar to that in prisons, where they had to, you know, abort the mission kind of thing because people were getting dangerously close to abusing others.
Yeah, that was the Stanford prison experiment, right? Well, I found some interesting facts about that, because I thought, how did that happen? Why did this group abuse the other group, like as a total group abusing another group? And I found that let's see, the volunteers for a prison study. Let's see. Okay. So what kind of this, a psychologist ran an experiment to figure out what kinds of people are drawn to that kind of a study in the first place. And they found that volunteers for a prison study scored about 26% higher on aggression and belief in social dominance, 12% higher on narcissism, and 10% higher on authoritarianism than people who signed up for psychological studies in general. So the people,
oh, interesting.
Yeah, so it actually drew that kind of people. So I found that very interesting, because I couldn't figure out how that happened, but that explains part of it, at least.
That's really interesting. So that they would know what kind of experiment they were being called into, which is
exactly.
I didn't check. That's a really smart thing. So I didn't check on the background of this other experiment setup with the electrodes, but I'm now guessing that it might have been the same thing.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that I found that really interesting.
Which is kind of an interesting thing too, because you wonder how prevalent that is in society itself. You know, because some research is indicating that it's becoming more prevalent. Yeah, I
wonder why. I wonder what's happening that's becoming more prevalent.
Yeah, I don't really know. I don't know exactly how that. I mean, I have a sort of a small understanding of how, you know, how people are affected, you know, and become sort of narcissistic, and it always has to do with character development and people not being allowed to express their own individual needs and personalities, because they have a very overbearing either parent or a caregiver or something who wants them to listen to what they have to say and lead a life that they want them to lead. And they slowly kind of lose their own personal identity and become much like the person that has sort of stifled their own development.
Okay.
And so there's a little bit of that, and I don't know, why that would be more predominant in a culture at this point in time, but it would be an interesting thing to look at. I mean, because if you have a number that says that there's this much of an increase in the population of sort of narcissistic personality types, what the heck?
Yeah. Do you think it might have anything to do with like social media and the amount of bullying and stuff like that goes on? Because you can be anonymous, and so you can really, those kinds of people could kind of, do that kind of thing anonymously.
Well, that would be certainly be something to look at, because there must, at some level, there must be enough of a shift in what is influencing people that it would create, those tendencies more. So I would be really interested in actually looking at that whole thing. But the other thing that I was looking at in this thing of power is that there is a clear indicator, and there's been a couple of studies in, some of them started in the 60s, but they're going on, in various places. Corporations are investing in more research, and school systems are investing in more research. And that this whole empathy comes up again, and the thing of empathy comes up again and again. It shows on itself on tests of empathy. Powerful people feel less distressed when someone sitting across from them tells a story of great personal hardship. Where high-powered people are less likely to realize that others don't share their same privileged knowledge about things, suggesting they anchor too much on their own experience. So, if you're sitting across from somebody who said, well, both of my pets are gone, and I just smashed my car, and I don't know what to do. And he goes, oh, get another car, that kind of thing. It's just, that they see the world from their perspective. And because they don't have, as strong empathic skills, they just write them off as like losers.
Yeah. And you know what that also makes me wonder? I wonder if those kinds of people are put in those positions on purpose, so that you have someone that is more how do I say it, like less inclined to get involved in maybe their employees' personal problems and stuff, and can just brush them off.
Yeah. Yes, and that's more than likely, because this goes on to say, while there is relatively little research on perspective taking, because they call this, from different perspectives, on perspective taking and harassment, one 2008 study of nearly 500 people did find links. The participants, recruited via newspaper flyers and the like, watched videos of actors playing out situations pulled from major harassment cases. Both men and women higher in perspective taking were likely to rate the sexualized behavior as unwelcome. And so if you were lower in perspective taking, you would say, well, I don't know that's not really much more than a kind of misunderstanding, I think.
Yeah.
little dip in the empathic world there. In organizations, cynicism from leadership regarding sexual misconduct can lead to what clinical psychologists refer to as institutional betrayal, where the trauma of an assault is compounded by bureaucratic incompetence or opposition to indifference from management.
Right. Yeah.
And you can try. I think that you can translate that into almost any organization. And if you were to go in with a mindset like that, kind of a research mindset and look at what happened in the residential schools, what would that research project look like?
Not good.
No,
Not good. No.
no.
I found,
Go
oh,
ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was going to just touch on, because you were mentioning companies and stuff, an article that I found from the Washington Post. It was written by this guy, Adam Grant, and he wrote it in 2019. And he was talking about, he said last year at the World Economics Forum in Davos, so that must have been in 2018, he wanted to understand the impact of power on people. So he sat down with 24 leaders, including current or former CEOs of Microsoft, Google, General Motors, Goldman Sachs, and the Gates Foundation. Over and over again, I heard that power doesn't change people as much as it accentuates their pre-existing traits.
Yeah.
So, and then the founder and CEO of Slack, I'm not quite sure what company that is, says power, it doesn't make you an asshole or whatever. It just makes you more of who you already were.
Yeah.
Which I was happy to discover that.
Yeah, and I guess that the important piece of that is that there has to be, I think, a much greater emphasis on that particular aspect of leadership. And, some people get a hold of power and you can't get rid of them because they've changed the rules when they get in power.
Exactly.
But it takes a much greater, sort of effort to deal with them. And I think it has a lot of a real huge impact on an organization, and probably mostly a negative way. Mm-hmm. Because there's that character that strives to achieve the position of power. It seems to me, if you're really working to get that power, you want it for a reason, whether it's this self-aggrandizing reason or this look at me, or now I finally have power, or whatever it might be. And that lacks a certain aspect of character that includes perspective and empathy and mm-hmm. social awareness, and all of the things that a leader would be required to have to improve any situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like what you found about about narcissism rising at this time really kind of lines up with the authoritarian leaders in the world trying to make a not a comeback but a stand. I mean, a good example is down in the States. I mean, a lot of their norms were just on the honor system, like this is just what we do and this is just what we don't do. Yeah. And of course the last administration just kind of broke all of those, and there was no stopping them because there was no legal mm-hmm. Barriers like boundaries put in place, and so he just mowed them all over.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the piece that is a change factor as well, is that when these folks are kind of hidden in darker corners, just doing these things that are destructive and that are not not meant to improve general conditions except for themselves mm-hmm. and their immediate peer group, that when they're in such a public place as that you now see the actual damage and destruction that occurs as a result of that kind of leadership. Yeah. And I think that will also be well hidden within some of the religious structures.
Mm-hmm. And I'd say in even more so in religious structures, because people have such a high regard for their faith and their leaders, their faith leaders and stuff. I think people kind of already have, like politicians in a category, well, they're just a greasy politician. But I think a lot of people really have a lot of faith and trust in their religious leaders.
Yes. So it's easy to see that how that power, how that abusive power can sometimes go on sort of not unrecognized as much as not dealt with because of the general sort of belief in this in the system itself.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Very wild business to get into it. I mean, the thing about this that I find so interesting is that we're having to pay more and more attention to this power structure as, you know, we're understanding more about how people are impacted. And you know, the residential schools are such a sad, glaring example of what happens when power goes kind of challenged.
Mm-hmm.
And that the people that are the victims of it are so powerless.
Yes, especially, I mean, children. I mean, you can't get more powerless, you know, like they're so trusting and naive and innocent. And, you know, it's just really such, I think that's why it's making such an impact in Canada and around the world is because they were children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's a sad situation, and I hope that this dialogue with, you know, within our own country happens at a much more serious and real level, and that we're open and willing to hear the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And to understand how that happened and to take responsibility. And if we can't do that, we have failed.
Yes.
Quite miserably, actually.
Well, it does seem like we're at a time in human evolution or consciousness right now. There seems to be, like, you know, how you mentioned that narcissism is on the rise, authoritarianism is on the rise. You know, we're facing a pandemic, we're facing a lot of political strife, we're facing a lot of like the stuff that's going on in Canada and the discovery of all of these graves. Like it seems like it's just a moment in time that a lot of this stuff is kind of bubbling up to the surface, and it's say, take a look.
Yeah, I agree.
People, take a look.
Yeah, I agree with you. And take an open look, you know, like learn what this is, what is happening here. And it's so important because it affects where we go from here.
It does.
We have to see it. We have to see it, and we have to acknowledge that there is something rotten in the state of Denmark.
Exactly. Yes. Yes, and that comes back to awareness, right?
Awareness.
About awareness.
I mean, we've been talking about that right from the beginning, because everything that you look at, whether it's an individual characteristic of your own, something that's going on in your family, or something that's going on, if you're not aware of what's going on and don't have the kind of the impulse to take a look at it, because change only happens through a process like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so good luck to us, hey? Good
luck to us. But, you know, we can do with it with awareness.
Yes. Well, I agree with that. And to, you know, to continue to make yourself aware of what's going on, to look a little deeper into whatever situation or movement or affect in a society that you come upon, to try to understand what's happening here. And when, you know, we've been kind of poking away at this for the last 2 or 3 episodes of what's happening here.
Mm-hmm.
How can we address this? How can we stay present to something that is clearly changing?
Right.
And to jump into that change in as positive and open-minded way as possible, because it's going to affect us sooner or later.
Yes. And you know, when we did that episode on synchronicity, you know, the fact that this is all kind of happening at the same time, I don't think is an accident.
No, I agree with you. Something is afoot. Yeah. Something is afoot. Anyway, well, we'll keep on keeping on, right?
Yeah, we'll keep our eyes open and aware.
Now, have you been watching anything lately?
Well, I haven't really been watching anything, but I was turned on to a book by you. And it kind of falls into it, what we're kind of
Oh, it
talking
couldn't
about,
have, because you had mentioned this, you said, no, is this synchronicity or what?
right? So why don't you talk about it?
Well, I was wandering around in chapters a few days ago, and I had no idea that this author had written a new book. And it's Gary Zukav, and he wrote the book, The Seed of the Soul. Now, you said that was a book that had a lot of impact on you, didn't you?
Oh, huge, huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a game changer for me.
Yeah, kind of one of those wake up books.
Yes, it was, I was like a sponge, and as I read that book, like I just soaked it in. It filled me up. And it was at a time that I was going through a tough time. Somebody very close to me had passed away, and that book came to me. And it just really was one of those books that really, really impacted me.
Yeah. I read it. I don't, I think it was one of the first books that I read that I thought, wow, I have a soul.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
wasn't quite sure up until then. Thanks, Gary. So anyway, he has written a new book called Universal Human. And the subtitle is Creating Authentic Power and the New Consciousness. And that's why I thought we were laughing about this, about how, we'd chosen this topic of does power corrupt? And along comes Gary Zukav, and he says, well, your power comes from within. And until you find the place of your own authentic power, there is little you can do. And what's the first thing? Awareness.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
And then he talks about a number of processes, and kind of shares a bit of what he's learned over time, and how he is recognizing that we have this new consciousness emerging because we have to.
Yes, and so I think it's all part of what we were just talking about, the things that are happening now, and then along comes the book that helps to kind of explain that. And I love the way that he talks about authentic power, because we're talking about power, and he talks about authentic power and what is that, and where does it come from. And so when you told me that he had a new book out, I didn't even care really what it was about. I knew I had to have it because I just loved his other one so much.
Yeah. So I'll put that information on the website or on YouTube. And I think that's about good. So
Me too.
You enjoy the rain, stay out of the heat, drink lots of water, and have fun. And
are you going?
What?
Okay. Yeah. No, I was just going to ask if you were going to be out in the cool rainy weather today.
I don't know. It depends on how much it rains, because if we're out and it's really raining, I can't use my camera.
I don't think it's going to rain. I think it's supposed to kind of clear up this afternoon. So maybe you can go out and take some of those beautiful pictures that you take.
Thank you. Okay, well, we'll see you next time.
Okay, bye, Pat.
Bye, Barb.